Now that there's a chance, I will start actually resing people again. Never mind.
Welcome back to the Mentor Roulette grind. This time, we're playing Aetherochemical, specifically because of its incredible strength in low-level leveling dungeons, as this took place the day after the third Dawntrail relic step released, which you may have heard has caused some commotion. Although, looking at the duty distribution, you can probably tell that is not what actually ended up happening. So, with that aside, for Duty 1, we went to Keeper of the Lake, and this run went very well, with a solid tank, solid Reaper, and solid Bard. For Aetherochemical at this level, the main thing to optimize is cards. If draw is about to be ready, get those defensive cards out the door. Otherwise, use them smartly. Whenever Divination is coming up, use Lightspeed to give yourself the room to weave the cards you need. Then Divination, play damage card, Malefic, draw, play damage card, and then back to what you were doing. Between the defensive cards, Arrow increases all healing received by the target, so using that first and then Spire and maybe an Aspected Benefic is better than any other order, if you're going to use Aspected Benefic of course. Ewer functions sort of like an OTCD Aspected Benefic, and Bowl of course reduces damage taken. All of it is good to put on the tank, and if the draw happens to line up for it, sometimes you may even use all 4 cards in succession. For Duty 2, we went to Stigma Dreamscape, a rare one. On the second boss, both the DPS had some issues with the automobile assault cannon, mainly due to uptime focus of course. My advice for this one is that it is pretty unlikely you will get a lot of solid uptime by chasing the boss anyway, so maybe plan a ranged attack if you have them, or stand ready to hit the boss as it passes you, and then make it to the safe side of the arena. Sometimes you can also find a pixel safe spot to catch the boss as it passes multiple times. Another mechanic that can confuse some players is the sniper cannon. The way it works is that a line AoE is fired in the direction of the marked player when the boss passes a specific marker on the center line, meaning you can stand pretty loosely just fine as long as you are not pointing your laser at other players. Often, people solve it by being extremely overcautious and aiming their laser exactly sideways. The final boss also has an interesting oversight, you could say. The Omega Frames and Hybrid Dragons each will do one mechanic and then walk over and self-destruct. However, the self-destruct does not do that much damage and only applies a Vuln stack if it deals non-zero damage. Importantly, the time between these waves of self-destructs are far enough apart that as long as you don't take Vuln stacks from anything else, you can reset the stacks each time. And yes, the implication here is that the self-destructs deal little enough damage that you can just ignore those adds altogether. Although, the difference is small enough that I only really recommend doing so if everyone is in on it. For Duty 3, we went to Castrum Meridianum with a solid team. The reason why I was expecting a lot of low-level leveling roulettes is that it turned out that the most effective way to grind the crystal paste to the third Dawntrail relic step, at least in terms of speed, is to unequip your gear and wear a low-level weapon, so that you only qualify for ARR leveling duties, and then you queue, and then of course run the duty as fast as possible. I was expecting this to turn up a ton in Mentor Roulette, and if that were the case, Aetherochemical is very strong in this level range, having Essential Dignity and Lightspeed already in Sastasha. What actually happens instead is that this leveling roulette spam saturates leveling roulette so much that mentors are largely not needed at all, so we end up in pretty much any other content than that instead. For Duty 4, we went to Wanderer's Palace. The hardest part of this duty tends to either be dealing with the gigapulls you can do, or the big room with the rusted Nemean devices. What makes it difficult is mainly the confusion that can happen with first-timers. You need the 2 Tonberries at the door killed, the oil they drop must be looted, and both the device at the door and the device further down the way must be fixed, all the while being chased around by untargetable Gigatonberries that can two-shot non-tanks. Most of the time, this is no issue, but in our party, we were all quite consistent about forgetting to pick up oil, which meant we had to run back multiple times. Aside from this, the duty went quite well. For Duty 5, we went to ARF with a solid team once again. On the second boss, we managed to get the enumeration right, and on Asian Prime, no one gets hit by the donuts and circles, although for a moment I thought the tank was going to chase me with the chain debuff, but the chain broke before they had the chance, thankfully. So the only issue we had over the course of the duty, I think, was the machinist being petrified on the second boss, and that hardly even counts. For duty 6, we went to Porta Decumana. In the second phase, I only use Aspected Helios like twice in the first half of the fight, but after seeing both of the DPS get hit by Citadel Buster, I no longer feel confident leaving them far from healthy, so I end up healing a lot more in the second half as a result. Strangely, no one bothers to use the limit break in the final bit of the fight, but of course, we finished just fine anyway. For duty 7, we went to Pharos Sirius, and the machinist knew me. Hello! The tank goes straight to the Gigapull at the start, which goes sideways before we even finish pulling as one of the DPS dies on the way. Then the tank only uses Rampart and Reprisal in the fight, meaning they survive mostly thanks to me spam healing them with Sinistry active for that 40% boost. After the pull, when they ask if they should pull less, we instead have a bit of a talk about all the cooldowns they didn't use when they suggested they used what they had. Well, not even half of the cooldowns they had were used. I also now realize they didn't even use No Mercy. Wow. Anyway, the first boss looked a lot worse than it really was, and we came through mostly fine. The second boss gets a lot more cursed as eggs were being broken almost at random, leading to a very angry Mama, which eventually promptly led to both DPS dying instantly from a body slam. Somehow, I survive a body slam a moment later, and we barely clear the fight before a wipe. Where we truly get in trouble is on the pack just before the third boss, where players decide to try and stop the valve while standing in front of it, which leads to party-wide damage and no closed valve, which then overlaps with the sprite's Banish 3. The tank now, finally remembering all of the defensive cooldowns they have, except Aurora, managed to survive until I make it back to them. We managed to stabilize and the rest of the duty goes fine. For duty 8, we went to Ifrit hard. Not that much to say here, the duty went pretty normal for an Ifrit hard. We even had the LB3 used when it was offered. Unfortunately, as we had no barrier healer, there was no way to protect the samurai from the incessant knockbacks. For duty 9, we went to M3N, Arcadion's Brute Bomber, with Shaq and Ilana. This fight is actually quite interesting in regards to gear creep. In the last raid tier, I recall the fight usually ended shortly after the combination of the Lariat combo and the fused bombs. Mainly because most of the time this combination led to multiple deaths, so whatever remained had to carry the party to victory. Now, with even more gear, the fight ends during the draft boosted Infernal Spin, which, to be fair, is also a mechanic that sometimes catches some players, but rarely ever kills them. I wonder if, as this tier progresses further, this mechanic also gets skipped. For duty 10, we went to Keeper of the Lake again. Something interesting on Midgardsormr is that the random configurations of the side dragon's line AoEs overlapping with the seemingly random choice of line, circle or donut AoE from Midgardsormr himself can lead to some very surprising combinations. Most of the time, the combination of AoEs lead to a safe spot within melee range, but this is apparently not guaranteed. For instance, if the two side dragons hit the two middle rows of the arena, and Midgardsormr chooses to do the circle AoE, then it seems the only safe spot is actually at the entrance to the arena. Of course, being hit by one of the AoEs is survivable, but it is still quite surprising that this is even an option, considering how often boss fights like this one always make sure there is a correct answer within punching distance. For duty 11, we went to Great Gubal Library hard, and the monk knew me. Hello! The rest of the party was a bit odd though. Let's start with the Black Mage. Over the course of the duty, they mainly relied on Blizzard 4, specifically, also on AoE, with them somewhat early on realizing that if they're going to spam B4 a ton anyway, they didn't need to be in UI 3, so they just transposed to ICE to do this. Then, at random, they'd sometimes fire 3 and then spam fire 4 and then finish with a flare. If they had it, they would use Thunder. Near the end of the duty, they also realized Fire 2 was an option. I will say, they were a sprout, so they might still have been learning these tools. Although, I did get the impression they were going perhaps in the wrong directions. The Dark Knight, on the other hand, almost exclusively used Rampart for defensive cooldowns, and spent more time at full MP than not. Although they did use options like Salted Earth. There were also random points where they just stopped acting altogether, or a point where they suddenly spammed Hard Slash for several GZDs and other oddities like that. Now, thanks to some of these oddities, there's a bit of new stuff to talk about on the last boss. I certainly didn't realize that if you're still an imp when the lightning spread AoEs strike, it becomes a one-shot. But there you go. Additionally, eventually a behemoth spawns, which will use Ecliptic Meteor, while comets spawn to hide behind. Part of the chat were surprised that it looked like the boss had a hardened rage, but no, you simply have to hide behind the comet like usual. For duty 12, we went to Ignored Flames with Jack. Strangely, I ended up only applying my dot once, expecting a reapplication to not be worth it, only for the fight to go on for another over 45 seconds. Let's just say that I could safely have maintained my dot on the boss the whole time. And finally for duty 13, we went to Ramuh Extreme, with Shaq tanking. On the first pull, I realized we're in trouble after the first blue circles, as people are not working together for it, and Shaq didn't realize he needed 3 orbs sooner, and ends up dying. Due to the amount of confusion, we end up with way too many orbs, causing the next wave of blue circles to kill off both healers, leading to a wipe. For the second pull, it becomes clear that at least half of the DPS were not listening, or at least did not understand the explanation about Chaotic Strike, as while they did stack closer together, they did not go where they needed to be, making it difficult for people to find them. This level of confusion once again leads us to having too many orbs, causing the next blue circles to kill the charmed players. We somehow make it to the ad phase, but then promptly wipe. On the third attempt, we get to the ad phase with 0 deaths and things being done mostly right, but as the ad phase progresses, things start to spiral a bit, causing us to exit the ad phase with 2 dead DPS. For the most part, we were holding together, but then Ramuh randomly skipped a blue circles bit after Chaotic Strike, leaving both healers stuck. Somehow, the party survives until the next blue circles, except the samurai decided to step away with the circle instead of help, and by the time the next blue circles after that came, it was already over. For the fourth attempt, we again make it to the ad phase, and then during it, 3 players, including the other healer, die during blue circles. We sort of managed to stabilize, and I even prolong the monk's charmed life with rescue. What seems to be causing extra trouble is that usually when I get this duty, I'm in a position where I can carry pretty hard mechanically, either by being a tank myself, or by being a DPS being able to focus on getting tethers done fast, getting the blue circles right, prioritizing managing orbs and so on. But as a healer, the additional responsibilities make it difficult to manage everything all at once. Ultimately, what wipes us this time is again something I can't control. I'm not joking. The monk was genuinely running zigzag around the orbs instead of grabbing the orbs, and when death then arrived thanks to orbs not being dealt with before blue circles, the tether jumped onwards and wiped whatever was left. For the fifth attempt, we once again make it to the ad phase with no major issues, but then Shaq gets charmed out of position. I save them with a well-timed rescue. The other tank doesn't realize the problem and doesn't emergency extend their debuff and promptly dies. And Shaq is also missed for blue circles again, so he goes down too. In a strangely miraculous way, the boss then gets busy doing Chaotic Strike, blue circles and so on, so no tank alive somehow isn't an immediate wipe. Then the killing begins, with 2 DPS going down, and despite the other tank being alive first, Shaq is the one that grabs 3 orbs and steps in. At this point, I'm worried about how long the ad phase has taken, which is very justified considering the ad phase hard caps at about 2 minutes for a hardened rage, and we cleared it with about 8 seconds left based on my estimate. We finally stabilize as the ad phase finishes, only for a tank to take a tank buster with no debuff. Thankfully, Shaq thought fast and solved it. When the Rolling Thunder tethers come out, the samurai gets around to it quite carefully. For the second Rolling Thunder, the healers are tied together, so I solve it. For the third Rolling Thunder, both the monk from before and Bard try to solve it, removing quite a lot of orbs, but at least it's solved now. Whatever, the boss is close enough to death that a tank switch probably isn't needed. Well done. Quite a surprising mix of duties this time, but yet another cleared Ramuh Extreme, with an Ice Mage among other things. This time we also passed 27/40ths on the achievement. Now, That is all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you would like to support me and my channel more directly, you can become a member like these wonderful people here. You can also alternatively support me through Twitch or Ko-Fi. Links in the description. You can also support the channel by letting the YouTube algorithm know by liking the video, leaving a comment, subscribing, sharing, and hitting the bell to get notified when next I post a video. Fun fact, originally, Sinistry actually only applied on heals that were actually targeting the affected player, instead of also working when healing others. This was changed 2 months into Heaven's Warp to the way it works now, and was also accompanied by a 20% healing potency boost for the Astrologian similar to Neutral Sect. Weird.